The vast Pacific Ocean hides countless secrets within its dark depths, where light cannot penetrate and silence reigns supreme. It is a silent tomb for those who venture too far from the safety of land and find themselves at the mercy of the relentless waves. Among the many tales of maritime disappearances that plague the history of navigation, there is one that stands out for its chilling silence and total lack of resolution. This is the story of the MV Joyita, a vessel that set sail with 25 souls aboard, only to be found drifting aimlessly weeks later without a single living person on its decks. The mystery of what transpired during those lonely days at sea remains unsolved to this day, leaving a void that no investigation has ever been able to fill. The year was 1955, and the location was the port of Apia in Western Samoa, where the tropical heat hung heavy in the air. The Joyita was preparing for a routine voyage to the Tokelau Islands, which was a journey that should have taken merely 2 days to complete across the open water. The vessel itself was a sturdy wooden ship that had seen better days, but was considered reliable enough for the inter-island trade that sustained the local economies. Captain Thomas Henry Miller was the man in command of the ship, and he was known as a seasoned sailor who understood the temperamental nature of the Pacific Ocean better than most men. However, financial troubles clouded his mind, and the pressure to complete this specific cargo run was immense. The Joyita was not just a simple merchant vessel, for she had a history of luxury and glamour before the hard years of trade wore her down. She had been built in Los Angeles as a private yacht for a wealthy movie director before serving in the United States Navy during the Second World War. By 1955, she was showing signs of age and neglect, with her white paint peeling and her engines requiring constant attention. Despite her faded glory, she was constructed with cedar frames and oak planking, making her incredibly buoyant. The locals believed she was practically unsinkable, which makes the events that followed even more disturbing and inexplicable to those who knew the ship well. On the passenger list were government officials, a doctor, a copra buyer, and several families, including children who were looking forward to returning home. There were 25 people in total preparing to board the vessel, along with a heavy cargo of medical supplies, timber, and empty oil drums. The atmosphere on the dock was busy and chaotic as stevedores loaded the final crates under the watchful eye of Captain Miller. The departure had already been delayed due to mechanical issues with the port engine, but Miller was determined to leave. He knew that further delays would cost him money he did not have, and he pushed the crew to ready the ship for immediate departure despite the lingering mechanical concerns. The ship finally cast off from Apia on October 3rd, 1955, heading north into the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The weather was reported to be fair, and the sea was calm, offering no warning of the tragedy that was about to unfold. As the Joyita slipped over the horizon, the families waving from the shore had no idea that they were seeing their loved ones for the very last time. The ship was expected to arrive at Factual in the Tokla group on October 5th. The radio operator on shore waited for the signal confirming their arrival, but the radio remained silent. No message came through the static, and the scheduled time of arrival passed without a sign of the white hull on the horizon. Days turned into a week, and the silence from the Joyita began to breed a deep and gnawing panic among the officials and families in Samoa. The port authorities in Toklo confirmed that the ship had never arrived and had not been seen by any other vessels in the area. A massive search and rescue operation was launched by the Royal New Zealand Air Force, covering over 100,000 square miles of ocean. Planes flew low over the water, scanning for debris or a life raft, but the ocean yielded nothing but endless waves. It was as if the Joyita and all 25 people aboard had simply been erased from existence by an unknown force. For 5 long weeks, the fate of the Joyita remained a complete mystery, fueling rumors and speculation across the Pacific Islands. Hope had all but faded when a merchant ship named the Tuvalu spotted something drifting in the water hundreds of miles off course. As the Tuvalu drew closer, the crew realized with a jolt of horror that it was the missing Joyita. The ship was listing heavily to the port side and was partially submerged, with her deck awash with seawater. There was no movement on board, and no signal flares were fired to greet the rescuers. The vessel was drifting like a ghost ship, silently traversing the ocean currents north of Fiji, far from where she should have been. A boarding party from the Tuvalu cautiously approached the derelict vessel, feeling a sense of dread as they climbed onto the slippery listing deck. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of water lapping against the hull and the creaking of the wooden structure. The smell of decay and stagnant water filled the air as the sailors began to explore the abandoned ship. They called out for survivors, but their voices echoed unanswered through the empty corridors. It quickly became apparent that the Joyita was completely deserted. All 25 people, including the crew and the passengers, had vanished without leaving a trace of where they had gone or why they had left. The state of the ship deepened the mystery rather than solving it, because the conditions on board were baffling and contradictory. The ship was listing because of flooding in the bilges, yet she had not sunk due to her cork lining and empty cargo drums. The boarding party found that the flying bridge had been smashed, and the canvas awning was rigged in a makeshift manner over the deckhouse. This suggested that the passengers might have tried to shelter from the sun or rain after some catastrophic event. However, the ship was still afloat and perfectly capable of sustaining life, which raised the terrifying question of why experienced sailors would abandon a floating ship. Inside the cabin, the investigators found scenes that hinted at a sudden and violent interruption of daily life. The ship clock had stopped at 10:25, giving a frozen timestamp to the disaster, though it was unclear if it was morning or night. A doctor bag was found on the floor containing a stethoscope, a scalpel, and 4 lengths of blood-stained bandages. This discovery sent a chill through the search team, suggesting that someone had been injured or perhaps there had been a struggle. The presence of blood turned the mystery from a maritime accident into a potential crime scene or a desperate fight for survival. Further inspection revealed that the navigational logbook and the sextant were missing, which indicated that Captain Miller or the mate had taken them. This is standard procedure when abandoning a ship, but it made no sense to abandon the Joyita. Captain Miller knew better than anyone that the cork lining made the hull unsinkable. He would have never given the order to leave the safety of the vessel for the uncertainty of the open ocean in small rafts. Yet all 3 of the life rafts were missing from the ship. The davits were swung out, implying they had been launched intentionally rather than washed away by a storm. The radio on the Joyita was discovered tuned to the international distress frequency of 2,182 kilocycles. However, a closer inspection revealed a break in the aerial cable that would have limited the range of any transmission to just 2 miles. This meant that the crew had likely been sending frantic distress calls for hours or days that no one could hear. The thought of them screaming for help into the void while the ship took on water is a harrowing image of isolation. They were effectively screaming into a vacuum while surrounded by an indifferent ocean. The engine room provided more clues, but no definitive answers to the fate of the crew and passengers. The port engine clutch was found disassembled, with parts scattered about, suggesting the crew had been attempting repairs mid-voyage. The starboard engine was found covered in a mattress, potentially used to plug a leak or muffle noise. A cooling pipe in the galvanized circuit had corroded and failed, allowing water to flood into the bilges. This mechanical failure explained the flooding and the list, but it did not explain the total disappearance of 25 people from a vessel that refused to sink. Investigators also noted that the cargo was almost entirely missing, which added a layer of sinister intrigue to the case. 4 tons of cargo, including medical supplies and timber, were gone, yet the ship was still floating. If the cargo had been jettisoned to lighten the ship, it would explain its absence. But valuable items were also missing. The lack of personal belongings and the missing navigational equipment suggested a planned departure. Yet the chaotic state of the deck argued for panic. The contradiction between order and chaos made it impossible to construct a single, coherent timeline of events. One of the most disturbing theories that emerged during the inquiry was the possibility of a mutiny aboard the Joyita. Captain Miller was known to be stubborn, and he had a reputation for conflict with his crew over wages and conditions. If the engines failed and the ship began to flood, Miller might have refused to abandon his vessel, knowing she was unsinkable. The passengers and crew panicked by the rising water, and the listing deck might have turned against him. A violent struggle could explain the broken bridge and the blood-stained bandages found in the bag of the doctor. Imagine the scene on that dark ocean as the ship listed and the water rose in the darkness. The fear among the passengers would have been palpable as the single working engine failed, leaving them drifting. If Miller stood his ground, refusing to launch the rafts, the panic could have easily boiled over into violence. The finding of the doctor bag with bloody bandages suggests that someone, perhaps the captain himself, was injured in a confrontation. If the captain was incapacitated or killed, the remaining panic-stricken souls might have made the fatal error of launching the rafts. Another prevailing theory involved the presence of Japanese fishing fleets operating in the area during that time. The memories of the Second World War were still fresh in the Pacific, and tensions remained high. Some speculated that the Joyita might have witnessed something she was not supposed to see, or had an accidental collision. If a foreign vessel had intercepted them, they might have taken the crew and passengers captive, or worse, killed them to silence witnesses. However, there was no concrete evidence of a collision or foreign involvement found on the hull. The theory of pirates or illegal dumping also surfaced, as the missing cargo was a significant factor. If the Joyita had been intercepted by pirates, they would have stripped the ship of its valuable goods and eliminated the witnesses. But modern piracy was rare in that part of the Pacific. In 1955, the cargo of timber and medical supplies was valuable, but hardly worth the lives of 25 people. The missing cargo might have simply been thrown overboard by the crew in a desperate attempt to regain buoyancy. As the water level rose in the bilge, the most tragic and likely scenario involves a series of compounding errors and the psychological terror of the open sea. With the pipe broken and the bilges flooding, the pumps were likely clogged or insufficient. As the water rose, the generators would have failed, plunging the ship into total darkness. In the black of night, with the ship listing heavily and the radio useless, panic would have taken over. The passengers, unaware of the unsinkable nature of the hull, would have demanded to abandon ship. Captain Miller might have been overruled or too injured to stop them. If they did launch the life rafts into the ocean, they committed a fatal mistake that cost them everything. The Joyita did not carry enough life jackets for everyone, and the rafts were small and flimsy. Once in the water, the currents would have quickly carried the rafts away from the drifting ship. In the vast Pacific, a small raft is a speck of dust, invisible to search planes and ships. They would have been exposed to the blistering sun, the freezing nights, and the sharks that patrol those waters. The thought of them drifting away, watching their unsinkable ship remain afloat, is a horror beyond words. The formal inquiry into the disaster held in Apia blamed Captain Miller for the tragedy, citing his negligence. They criticized him for sailing with known engine faults and a lack of proper radio equipment. While Miller certainly bore responsibility for the condition of the ship, the inquiry could not explain where the people went. The verdict did nothing to bring closure to the families who were left with empty graves and unanswered questions. The blaming of a dead man felt like a hollow conclusion to a mystery that defied logical explanation. Strange rumors began to circulate about the Joyita, suggesting she was a cursed ship with a dark energy. Sailors spoke of bad luck that seemed to follow the vessel from her days as a yacht to her final voyage. The fact that she was found floating alone like a ghost ship only fueled the superstitious beliefs of the islanders. People claimed that the spirits of the 25 lost souls were trapped in the wooden hull, unable to find peace. The Joyita became a symbol of the unknown terrors that lurk in the ocean, waiting to claim the unwary. After the investigation, the Joyita was repaired and put back into service, but her reputation was forever tarnished. Crews were reluctant to sail on her reporting strange noises, and an overwhelming feeling of dread on board. She ran aground several times in the following years, as if the ocean was trying to claim her back. Eventually, she was stripped of her fittings and abandoned in a mangrove swamp, left to rot away into the mud. The physical vessel decayed, but the legend of her ghost crew remained vibrant and terrifying. The story of the Joyita is often compared to the Mary Celeste, but the presence of passengers makes it far more tragic. On the Mary Celeste, only the crew was lost, but here entire families vanished. The presence of children among the missing adds a layer of heartbreak to the horror. What did those children see in their final moments on the listing deck? The fear and confusion they must have felt is a thought that haunts anyone who delves deep into this story. The missing chronometer and sextant remain key pieces of the puzzle that suggest a planned navigation. If they abandoned ship, they intended to navigate to land, which was hundreds of miles away. But without a motor or sails on the rafts, their chances were non-existent. The decision to take these instruments implies a leader was present in the rafts, perhaps the mate. This points away from pure chaos and towards a calculated but ultimately doomed decision to leave the vessel. The bloody bandages found in the bag of the doctor continue to be the most visceral piece of evidence. Who was bleeding and why? Was it an injury from the broken pipe, or the result of a fight? The fact that the doctor had time to treat the wound and bandage, it implies a period of calm before the abandonment. This suggests that the situation deteriorated over time, rather than in a single instant. The blood is the only physical trace of the human suffering that occurred on that drifting ship. Today, the wreck of the Joyita is nothing more than rotting timber, consumed by the vegetation of the islands. However, the mystery remains as fresh and chilling as it was in 1955. No bodies were ever recovered, and no rafts were ever spotted. The ocean swallowed 25 people whole and refused to give them back. It serves as a grim reminder of how small and vulnerable humans are when pitted against the immense power of nature. In the end, the fate of the crew of the Joyita remains a blank page in the history books. Theories of mutiny, piracy, and panic all have their merits, but none fit every fact perfectly. We are left with the image of a silent water-logged ship drifting under the stars, carrying only ghosts. The radio dead, the bridge empty, and the life rafts gone. It is a tableau of desolation that defies explanation. The lingering dread of this story comes from the realization that we will likely never know the truth. The voices of those 25 people were silenced by the waves, and their final desperate moments are lost to time. The Joyita drifts in our collective memory, a ghost ship that refuses to sink, anchored by the weight of the missing. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and the Joyita is one of its darkest. When you look out at the endless horizon of the Pacific, remember the Joyita and her lost crew. Remember that the line between safety and oblivion is thinner than the wooden hull of a ship. The sea is a beautiful but indifferent killer, and it is always waiting. The silence of the Joyita is not empty. It is full of the screams that were never heard.